Okay, I'm going to spotlight you and yeah, thank you for being here.
Thank you guys for having me. My name is Burhan Azim. I'm a city councilor in Cambridge. Just so you know, Cambridge is a city of about 120,000 people. We're home to, Kendall Square, which is a lot of biotech companies like Moderna, who made the vaccine, also to Harvard and MIT. We have about a budget of about $800 million. We're working on municipal broadband right now, which is very, very exciting. And it's a little bit of my home turf because I am the uh, chair of the Public Utilities Committee, and so get to run the show a little bit as we're thinking about how exactly we want to implement this. It's very exciting. So we're in the middle of looking into municipal broadband. We have a feasibility study going out right now on like how exactly we may want to do this. I say the city is pretty committed to actually doing it. I think that multiple city councils have said that they want to do it. It's both, it'll be a lot cheaper, and we can talk a little bit about how that comes about, but also there's other benefits as well. Like you don't get usage caps. You don't get to, as someone who sells your browser history, you don't have like pricing issues where you sign a contract that's long term where the first month is really cheap and then after that like the price jumps. You don't have to have necessarily long term contracts. Um, and it would bring competition to the city, which is another really big plus. Right now our only service for most of the city is Comcast, and so we have not the greatest internet, especially in some places. It can be both very expensive but also uh, not that fast, and in some places even it's hard to even get a great connection. um, and I think that there's a huge digital equity component to it. Comcast charges a pretty high rate, which means that even in a city that in some ways invented the internet, we take a lot of pride in that. A huge chunk of residents, estimates kind of range between like 10 to 20%, just don't have internet access, which I think is a huge problem. And so we can, talk about what exactly municipal broadband means to us. Um, I actually have a small presentation for you guys that we just shared at my committee hearing, which I thought could be a helpful example. I won't take up too much of your time, but let me just share my screen if I'm allowed to do that. Hey, thank you. Um, so this was our latest presentation that was presented to the City Council on May 5th, as kind of an up as CTC, who is the consultancy we hired to do a municipal broadband survey, kind of gave an update on some of the technical business models, which I thought was very helpful. Um, um, so I just wanted to kind of give you guys a sense of like the things that we thought were really important to do as we were kind of figuring out what municipal broadband looks like. So a few things are site surveys and just doing a cost estimate of what things might look like. Figuring out what the business model is. Um, Market analysis. I think this is a huge one. So it's both like a residential survey that'll be scientifically accurate, but the biggest factor in municipal broadband, if it's going to be successful, is what the uptake rate is, right? So if you're having municipal broadband where 5% of people do it versus 50% of the city adopts your municipal option, that's a huge difference in economics, and that's probably the biggest factor. And so that's a very important key. Engagement with the business community. We have 120,000 residents in Cambridge, and oftentimes we think that that is critical in terms of like getting successful uptake. At least in Cambridge, we have 200 to 300,000 job, 2 to 300,000 uh, jobs in Cambridge, so more than we have residents. So in some ways, the daytime activity of how many businesses adopted is a bigger part of getting successful municipal broadband than just the residential. So that's a huge part of it that we just want to make sure we don't forget. We actually have a pilot already live. So we have about 15% of the city's housing stock is publicly owned or deed restricted affordable housing. The biggest among that is the Cambridge Housing Authority, which owns a lot of housing throughout the city. And we have started an option, a few buildings where this Cambridge Housing Authority has decided to just offer their own municipal option through a new service provider called Starry. And so we hooked them up in a couple of new high rises that the Cambridge Housing Authority recently built or renovated. And we're seeing how the uptake goes and how people feel about that option. So it's been a very exciting smaller demo, and happy to talk about that as well. Um, in terms of business models, I think that this is a really great example of what you're talking about. There's actually three levels to municipal broadband. So there's passive infrastructure, which is the fiber that goes under the roads. What's really cool about this is that this is installed once every 50 years, 100 years, and it's pretty reliable, right? Like the city can put these fibers in, and as long as your city is going to have internet, there's going to be some value to them. So you don't necessarily have to fully municipal option. You can just sell this to Verizon or Comcast, and they can use this infrastructure. So it's very low risk. There's active infrastructure, which is like the transformers, the signals that you use. This usually needs to be updated every 5 years. You still need this technology if you're going to have internet in your city, but it's a lot more uh, optional in the sense that there's a lot of different options for the technology you could use for these transformers, for these signals, for this electrical options. And so you have to make an active decision in how you're going to do it. And that means that there's more risk, right? You could choose things that are not the best. But there's a greater potential for savings in that, like, whenever you assume risk from potentially a company, uh, that is a risk that they would charge a premium for. So choosing what sort of electronics you want in the city and being able to pay that and manage switching over every couple of years as you move to newer technology is one different place. And then we have serverless provision, which is like um, delivering the broadband to subscribers. And so that includes things like making the website for where people can sign up, doing the marketing for signing up, actually running the show about like what the upload and download speeds should be, how it works if someone does illegal things on your thing, on your municipal option. So those day to day running the things. That's the most risky part, right? Because if you have a bad marketing campaign, if you have a bad website, that's a place where you can lose a lot of subscribers. But it's also the place where you have the most opportunity to gain, because this is where most of the margin comes from in municipal broadband. And so if you can do this effectively as a city, it's a place where you can get a huge amount of surplus value and really lower things. And then you have a lot of different options exactly how you do this. So like the four that we're looking at right now is the city just has passive infrastructure. The city um, and this is kind of outsourced. And then there's ones where we kind of take a lead in providing some active infrastructure to a place where we kind of own everything, all three steps of the process. And then we have a lot of the business model details, which I won't go through here. Um, but like it's cool, we have a little graph. So depending on the level of public ownership you want, the level of local control you want, um, the amount of competition you want, right? Competition is a huge key risk, and depending on how financially, risky you're willing to go, but also where you get the most cost benefits, you kind of have these options kind of presented to you. Um, a few other things to kind of just keep in mind is like if you have a lower uptake rate or in general you want to make it cheaper, oftentimes you could end up needing to subsidize municipal broadband. It's worthwhile thinking about where that subsidy comes from. It can come from general property taxes um, or sales taxes. It can come a utility fee, so what you charge subscribers, right? Like if you want to break even, you can charge a fee high enough that you will break even. Uh, but sometimes that can go against the spirit of making it affordable to everyone. Um, there's also some level of in-kind support. Placing, broadband under the streets can be very expensive, especially if you have to go permits or there's limitations on which roads you're willing to redig. So if you're willing to go through road reconstruction or change how you're going to move through public investments, that can actually be an in-kind support that can make municipal broadband cheaper than other versions, just because they don't have that kind of support from the city in terms of physical infrastructure, as well as grants and other things. Um, I just wanted to highlight. I'm happy to share this, but what's really cool about like some of these options we got, we're now in the discussion of what sort of business model we want, is that there's some great examples. So like Whip City is an example where you talk about um, a city where the ISP is operated by their electric and gas company. This is an interesting model, especially because Cambridge, we don't have a private or we don't have a publicly owned utility. It's a private electric company, and so that has pretty um, big implications, because when we talk about active infrastructure, usually this is owned in some of the examples by a public utility because it's electrical work. but we don't have a public utility. So does the city want to get into that, or do we want to kind of give it to Eversource, who is our private option? So that's one big part of the conversation. You also have Colorado Springs as an example, and how they're expected to get more than 200,000 users on theirs, which is a pretty huge number, and it's a really expansive big model. Um, and then you have Almond Amon Amon which is a really interesting example because it's a lot of their system is publicly owned, and so they kind of go further than most places. Um, and Dublin is also an interesting example in that they took on a lot of financial risk in that they have like 20-year contracts in particular, and they are financing a lot of the construction with the municipal bonds. This is actually kind of a key in that like it's really about risk. Um, we talk about all of these steps over here in terms of passive infrastructure, active infrastructure, service infrastructure, especially in this environment. But municipal bonds often have a much, much lower interest rate than what private industry can get. And so, if you're willing to assume the risk and doing the exact same thing as a private company, you can get passive infrastructure, active infrastructure, service provision done for much cheaper than a private company, just on the nature that the government is doing it and you can have a lower interest rate. And so, um, even if you're going to do the exact same thing, you can just end up being much, much cheaper to do so. And so that's just an important piece to kind of keep in mind. And so I'll kind of stop there as just like a high level description of where we are. We're going to get a full result on a lot of the questions around what cost uptake might look like, a lot of other questions this September. And I think hopefully in the next year or so, we'll finish the contract, how we want to handle this in terms of like, what do we want to create an internet utility, work with neighboring cities, make some of those cost estimates, and get the show running. But I would say the city's committed to it. We have 9 out of 9 city councilors who want to do this, so it's going to happen. It's just a question of how, and that's really where my committee comes in, and we're figuring out a lot of the details. And happy to share that with you guys.
This is so energizing and so beautiful, and congratulations on all the progress you've made in such a short time. And it's so nice to sound like everyone's rowing in the same direction, and that's not always happening in Seattle and King County and Washington State, as everyone here could tell you. Andy had a question in the chat. Did I hear correctly that 15% of the housing units in Cambridge are public owned, below market rate, or restricted deed affordable, and that they constitute the pilot user population?
15% of the city is publicly owned housing that's or deed restricted. Um, the pilot user population is the public housing population, but I would say that it's not everyone. So we've started with a couple dozen buildings, which is maybe a couple hundred to a couple thousand people. That's not the whole 17,000 people who live in public housing. It's a fraction of that, maybe 10%. And so we'll expand over time. But the pilot is a subset of that population, and that's
Great. And then Andy also asks, have you heard or anticipated resistance from commercial carriers about what we've been constantly up against, this concept of overbuilding, that comes from the federal government? Have you gotten any pressure around that issue?
I've actually never heard about this concern of overbuilding, so it's not something.
You're lucky. So overbuilding is this idea that like the entrenched corporate monopolies, that any public dollars that would go not to them is considered like wasteful. And so it entrenches and props up all of the existing monopolies, especially in urban environments where there are at least like 1 or 2 other providers. For example, we have Comcast and CenturyLink and Wave in Seattle, but most folks have to go to Comcast because the other ones just aren't enough at all. 25 is nothing. Not 25 is really like 5 or 3. I was getting to 1.2, and everyone here knows what that means, megabits per second. And so, overbuilding is when the federal government hands out their money. They won't hand it out if you already have something there. That's changing. The idea of overbuilding as like this pro-monopoly thing is changing slowly. Um,
Um, I would just say, I mean, I'm not in the weeds in this specific conversation because it's not a concern that comes up for us. I would just say, there's a National League of Cities conference that happens every year, which is like all of the cities in the US kind of come to DC to get information from the federal government, and the federal government was pushing municipal broadband pretty heavily. So if we feel like there's a lot of support on the federal level, and a number of grants available for us and other people. Um, I would say, if you think about overcapacity or overbuilding, the thing that comes to mind are like, do you have too much internet, or like do you have too much availability such that your city has excess surplus that's going to waste? Um, and I really don't think that's the case, especially, like municipal broadband is huge capacity, right? Like we want to be able to get to a day where we have like hundreds of megabits per second available to everyone. And that's so far from where we are now. So until we get there, I don't think we're over capacity anything. Especially because if think of it as something like, water or other sorts of things where you want everyone to have it and have as much of it as they kind of want to use for, within reason. I think that's pretty far from where we are.
Yeah, to be clear, Burhan, we didn't think that overbuilding was a problem. We think that protecting monopoly is a problem. And
I want to hear from Fernando and then Drew and then back to Andy.
that's helpful.
Thank you for your presentation. It's really helpful. I just have a question in regards to, and I didn't catch where you were. You said you're on the East Coast. You're in New York?
Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Massachusetts.
Yes, right outside of Boston. We like to think that, we're the cooler cousin.
Nice. So I'm sorry for that. I didn't catch it earlier. And so have you tried to partner with the Comcast and the Verizons? And the reason I'm asking is I with the Communication Workers of America, we're a labor union. We represent workers from AT&T, Verizon, Frontier, and people are going to municipal broadbands due to the fact of the big corporations not investing in communities and leaving a lot of communities behind. The problem that we have seen, and I'm not trying to ruin your anything that you presented because I think it's great, that there was a high failure rate within municipal broadbands due to the fact of the cities don't have the experience in maintaining, right? They don't have the workforce. They don't have experience in maintaining the high cost networks over time because they do fail. I mean, fiber is resilient and it lasts very long time. So that's the right thing to do. But has the city not tried to partner with Verizon and the Comcast through the American Rescue Plan money, through the incoming Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, to where you're due to get a minimum of $100 million for fiber investment to the community, with stringent rules that the NTIA just came out with on the 13th. That's going to prioritize unserved and underserved communities first. And because from what I understand, Verizon is interested in serving.
Fernando, I want to leave, Berm has to leave soon, so I want to hear his answer so far, and then we can get into that more after he's gone. But thank you for your question.
Thank you, Fernando. It's actually exciting to see representation from, if Baja understand this, from utilities workers, especially in unions. It's actually a core part of like my supporters. And in Cambridge City Council, like we have prevailing wage for underground utilities work. And so it's something that like a lot of our utilities workers are very excited about, in the sense that they see like, installing municipal option as a great jobs program. And so it's something that we have a lot of support from. Actually, it's just kind of funny because we had this conversation just like last week. So that's something I'm very keen aware of. I would say it depends on what you think the problem is in municipal broadband, right? If you think it's a capacity issue in that the, fiber in the streets is not actually able to provide the faster internet service as it is, and we need to increase the infrastructure, then in some ways, like a complete partnership with the existing dominant provider in your area can make sense, because like Eversource is our private electric provider, and when we need to install a new substation, we don't go to someone else. We go to Eversource, and we work with them to install a new substation. If you think the problem is that a lack of competition and a lack of innovation, or that this should be a public utility in the sense that there's other responsibilities that are not being met, then it doesn't always make sense. There was a question in the chat, I think, about like public-private partnerships, and I kind of broke it down into three levels: the passive infrastructure, the electrical infrastructure, and the day-to-day maintenance. We are looking at, especially earlier on when we're determining the risk of those second two things in electrical and passive infrastructure, of partnering with other providers, not Comcast, but there's Starry in our place. We have Verizon Fios. So that's potentially something that we're doing in those places. But I would say a core thesis of why municipal broadband works is competition is good and it can dramatically decrease prices, even if the entire city does not end up using our municipal option. The fact that there two exist, it means that there's some downward pressure on prices. And the second is, it really depends on the capacity and the financial strength of your city. Like, it is assuming some level of risk. But in Cambridge, at least, we kind of see this as financing a new school. The costs are actually end up being pretty similar for us in the scope of, depending on exactly what we want to do, between $50 and $200 million. And at that level of providing internet service for the entire city for decades, we kind of see it in that way of funding a new school, where it's like, is this something we want? Do we want, hundreds of megabytes upload and download speed to every resident of the city? Yes. We have the risk of installing fiber, but we have pretty good backup plans, and that we can always sell the fiber to an existing monopoly if we want to, if everything goes wrong. So let's start there and start with the passive infrastructure, and that's something we've all agreed to. And then if we're willing to assume more risk, but believe that this is a really good benefit, we can talk about the electrical infrastructure and then to the active one. But the passive infrastructure, the public utilities part about putting broadband under the roads, actually seems to us to be the least risky, the no-brainer that we'll do regardless of what we kind of come to, just because we want that faster internet service, and we can always sell it later on if we want to.
I wanted to back up for a second and give you, while we have you, for some context of what we've done so far with our group. So we started in fall of 2021, after I did some random tweets one night about how much I hated Comcast, and formed a super group and got in touch with digital equity folks that were forming and meeting almost weekly around the pandemic, and issues around, kids doing school in parking lots of fast food places to get Wi-Fi and all of that kind of, very heart-wrenching stuff that was in the news at the time. It was very trendy, to talk about the internet as a public good. All of a sudden, it had been in some circles, but all of a sudden it was in different circles. And so we got tied into that work. And then we also got tied into work. I wanted to give Drew Hansen a chance to speak about HB 1336 briefly and explain that, HB 1336 allowed the retails to have the public authority for the ports and PUDs to have retail authority. That was really exciting that it passed at the state level. Drew, I'll give you a minute to talk about that. And then I want to jump in and talk about at the county and the city level, what we've done as a group, and then maybe have one, can you give us some advice question?
Yes, super quickly, Baran, thanks. This is awesome, really exciting. I'm going to read your deck real carefully because all these case studies are exactly what we're looking at here. And of course, we can share our own, right? We got Anacortes, Washington is doing full municipal, publicly owned ISP, publicly owned infrastructure. It's like $30 a month for 1 gigabit up, 1 gigabit down. So the only thing to know about 1336, which it sounds like may not be a problem in Massachusetts, Washington was one of the evil states that had an actual state ban on counties, ports, and public utility districts running broadband directly to the consumer. Like, there's literally a state law that said they can't do it. And so people have been trying to get rid of that for 30 years. We built a big coalition, like tribes, parents, teachers unions, to find people on this call, like the students, and we beat them and got rid of that stupid ban this year. And so now, it's great, right? The Port of Seattle's thinking about doing something. Jefferson County PUD is rolling out a full end user broadband. We're trying to hustle that in a whole bunch of different ways. And the current battle so I'm a state legislator in normal life. Sorry, I guess that's kind of obvious, but the current battle is we got to make sure we keep the, thanks for the link, by the way, we got to make sure we keep the public money, both the federal and the state money, for public broadband. Not for, and I'm, you know, no disrespect to like, I mean, I get what's going on with some of this stuff, but like, I think the long-term solution to affordability for the consumer is public broadband. I absolutely think these should be union jobs, by the way. And so I'm glad for our CWA colleagues flagging that, because I want to, that's something I want to make sure, you know, I can figure out what we're doing with the broadband money. So in any event, that's what's going on in Washington State. Super awesome to see you. Look forward to reading the deck.
Awesome. And Drew, I just want to give a shout out to Drew. I've been saying this to other people in the legislature, is that one of the things Drew did such a great job of was making sure that the grassroots advocates that are just loud on Twitter and don't really know what we're talking about sometimes, that we were brought into like the center of the meetings.
Yeah, for sure.
Of the lobbying, and not everyone does that. And when you're just like someone that's doing this, like, you know, after hours or late at night or on the weekend, to be able to be brought into the center of what's going on and know when your voice speaking up is going to be the most impactful during legislative session, because you're there and hearing up close, like what the kind of experts are saying. There was just such a powerful lesson on a lot of legislators are scared to bring grassroots advocates in. So that was really nice. So thank you, Drew, for that.
No, well, right back at you, right? Team effort. I mean, we couldn't have done it without the massive army of everyone who's involved. Like, yeah, cool. So I'll shut up. Thank you.
I'm going to also give a minute to the predecessors of Upgrade King County, which is Upgrade Seattle. Devin, I know you're in another meeting right now doing tenant stuff, but if you can speak, you're welcome to. And if you can't, if you want to just say hi in the chat. But Devin founded Upgrade Seattle.
Hey, I thought I was muted, but of course I'm always wrong about that. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for doing this, and I love Upgrade Cambridge and all of the Upgrade family. We're all in this together.
Thank you. And again, I just want to, for folks that don't know, there was my favorite thing that Devin ever did was a slow internet walk, where we walked as slow as possible, holding buffering signs. It was in the rain, and we walked like a mile to City Hall, and it took us like 2 hours because we were walking so slowly. And when we got there, there was 2 legislators that were presented with awards that were these like doily art project floppy or CD-ROM weird trophies that Devin had glued together, that he presented to the council members that were trying to push for municipal broadband in Seattle. And we got really, really close, and we got so close that it kind of freaked out some folks, and there were some changes made around pricing, and there were some things that consumers got out of it. But we did have Ed Murray at the time that basically kind of used, it's nice to hear in your case, this isn't the case in Massachusetts, but in our case, the study was used as a way to kind of get all of our hopes up and then have them be dashed to say like, and now the study says, actually, this isn't actionable, this isn't feasible. And it was kind of a study that like we thought was going to lead to getting broadband, and then at the last minute, the study was changed to be a way to block it, which so often happens. But the work that they did meant so that everyone running for office in the subsequent year was in favor of municipal broadband. Same thing this last time. I think all of the council members were in support of it that were running, and so we have council members that are in support. Councilmember Ross was going to try to be here tonight, but wasn't able to. And we're about to embark on our comprehensive plan. And I'm trying to get public broadband put into our comprehensive plan at the city level and make it like kind of just baked into what we're talking about when we're talking about land use and the future values of like how we want to grow over the next 20 years, and making sure that public broadband has an element in the comp plan. So that's one thing we're working on. The second thing we're doing at the county level, and maybe Andy, you can speak to this, but you don't have to, is at the county level, there's a request for information around bidding on 24 miles of East Rail fiber that's going to be coming out in the next 2 months. It was supposed to be a request for proposal. We heard about it through Councilmember Zahalai, County Councilmember Zahalai's aide Aaron way back when, and we were able to interject ourselves and write a letter that was read to the county executive that allowed there to be a consideration for a public option in the initial planning for the request for proposal. Now, we kept the pressure on. The request for information continues to have a public element in it. And we're trying to make sure that it's not just like a box that they're going to check to try to shut us up, but that the public option will be taken seriously for this 24 miles of fiber that's being put in underneath a trail. It was an old railway that's being turned into like a biking and walking trail. So I know that you're a big advocate for complete neighborhoods and safe streets as well as broadband. And this is a really cool project because it's a bike path. It's a path for people to, enjoy, connect cities together. It's near Redmond. So it's just kind of reminds me of, how Cambridge is a really area of a lot of tech innovation and like kind of wealth because the stuff is so expensive. The fact that this is near Redmond is actually good because the community, the take rate would be pretty good if we could get it to be public. So it would be self-sustaining because we'd have a pretty good take rate. So there's an opportunity there that we don't want to have pass us by. And I guess the question is, how do we make sure that this request for information or request for proposal that it'll turn into, that the public option being studied is taken seriously? Kind of a big organizing question.
That's a good question. So to make sure that I'm answering the question would be around like, if you end up doing like a study, like how do you get the study to be taken seriously or to like go in the right direction in terms of like what the numbers might look like for you guys?
How do we make sure that there's somebody bidding on this request for information that would be a serious contender to actually take on the responsibility of even having some of the fibers, maybe not, all of the fibers, but having some piece of it be public? And the county council member, the furthest we've gotten them to move so far is kind of what you're saying, is that they want to make sure that there are public fibers that go to the public housing and that go to nonprofit housing along the way. So we do have that level of a commitment.
I would say two things. One is I would probably invite CTC, which is the company that we're using, to at least apply for your RFP, mainly because they do this in a lot of different places and they're kind of experts in the field. And everyone I've talked to from the whole spectrum has only wonderful things to say about them. So I would say that they're definitely a resource to reach out to. I would say in general, it's important how you write the RFP on like what you're looking for. For us, the question was not like if we're going to do municipal broadband, but how and what that scope should look like. And that's really important because to some extent, consultants will react to what you write. And now the question for us is like, what is the level of risk that we're willing to assume? And that's kind of the main question that we're looking at right now. And I think that that's really important in how you frame it. I think it's important because if you've already committed to doing public housing to have municipal broadband, you already decided to have municipal broadband to some extent. And so the question is like, where does that line end for you guys? And that's a much, different conversation than do we want to even try this at all? Because once you've done it for at least some public housing, you know that it works, you know that you can do it. You probably have a plan in place for how you maintain it, how you upgrade it. Like a lot of that technical foundational stuff, that's the hardest part of the conversation you've already done. And so the next level of like, do we want to, grow this more? How much more? In some way, that's a much easier question because it's the same thing that you've already done. It's just about doing it for more people. And so I think that's a really important piece.
I just want to put you in front of every single one of our county council members tomorrow. You have no idea. But I will be taking your clip and sending it to a few legislative aides for sure. Anyone else have any questions? I know it's like 10 o'clock at night there. I don't want to take your whole night. I want to send you off so we can have a conversation with the CWA folks. Is there anything else anyone wants to ask or related to pushing for municipal options in King County? We could talk about this for hours. I know I could. I've learned so much from all of you. Carl, who is the co-chair of Upgrade King County, you get the last question.
Yeah, like you mentioned, Seattle is, building, more affordable housing. We are having a regional homeless authority that's been buying up some hotels, in the downtown Seattle area. Curious if you could talk about what the process was like to kind of work with the housing authorities, discussing broadband with them. Are there any specifics you can share? It's been, an idea I've been kind of chewing on as well is like, what would it look like for the city to offer, the regional homelessness authority broadband access and kind of be a, you know, service provider for those kinds of, you know, homes?
That's a really great question. So for us, it was a pretty simple process in that, like, we have an affordable housing trust, and so we fund a lot of new affordable housing development. And so as they were renovating, the existing affordable housing or maintaining them through forms or not, we were like, you should try out this municipal broadband thing. We found a partner in Starry. So in this case, it was a public-private partnership in terms of helping us install some of the work for this pilot. And we just got them to lay down like fiber and do some other sorts of things. They have a very interesting like wireless technology that kind of works really well in high rises in particular, which really works for our public housing. And so we signed a contract with them, and we just kind of took it out of our affordable housing trust. I'm not sure exactly how your system works, but I mean, it's not in my mind, it's not that complicated. So yeah.
Gotcha. Cool. Thanks. Yeah.
That's awesome. So before you leave, I just want you to say one more time who you are and how you're the youngest counselor ever and how you're super rad and how everyone should follow you on Twitter and that you have jury duty tomorrow or whatever you want to say. One more cool thing, one more plug for how awesome you are.
Well, thank you to have you guys. My name is Burhan Azim. I'm a Cambridge City Councilor in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'm the chair of the Transportation Public Utilities Committee, so a lot of the work that we've done here. You can follow me on Twitter if you're curious to follow along. We'll be having a number of meetings on this, and I'm really excited. Like, I think that it fits into my technical wheelhouse. I went to MIT as an undergrad studying material science, so a lot of fiber and stuff. And so it's really cool to be able to do work that's I'm in some ways a little bit of an expert on. So that's like really fun. And you can follow along, and we'll be having a couple of meetings in the
I'm going to be sending you pictures of all the beautiful things in Seattle and trying to get you to move here. we need you as our transportation utility chair, because the one we have right now is the opposite of you. So that's all I have to say about him.
About an exchange program.
we need an exchange program for sure. Thank you. I'm a huge fan, and I'm honored that you were here, and I'm excited that everyone here got to hear you. And yeah, have a great night. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for having me. And my email and Twitter have been in the chat, so feel free to send me along a message if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next up we have a presentation from, I don't know if it's a Carissa, Darren, Fernando presentation. And you said it's okay if I record?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, cool, awesome.
Great, thank you. So thank you all for having us tonight. My name is Carissa Hahn. I'm going to be sharing a short PowerPoint with y'all, and then I'm going to turn it over to Fernando to answer questions, talk through any pieces that y'all want more information on. And I am the co-legislative political coordinator for Washington State alongside Darren. I'm a member of Local 37083, an employee at AT&T Mobility, an officer at my local, a steward, young worker program coordinator, all of it. They give me all the hats because I say yes to things. So I'm here to talk to you in the capacity of the legislative political piece, and I want Darren and Fernando to have a chance to introduce themselves real quick before we get rolling.
Fernando Roman, I'm part of I've been a 25-year member of the Communication Workers of America. I worked for 24 and a half years for Lumen, CenturyLink, Quest, US West, and I started up in the dial-up days. So I've been here for a very long time and understand the needs of consumers and the needs of the unserved and underserved. So part of a national committee meeting with wonderful groups like as yourselves, city council, federal, state representatives, trying, to really request fiber to the home for residents and labor standards.
Good evening, my name is Darren Hartman. I'm the president of the CWA Local 7803 out of Renton, Washington, and Alaska. I'm also the president of the Pacific Northwest Council for the CWA. I'm also the co-ledge, as with Carissa. And as with Fernando, I've been with from US West to Lumen for over 22 years, and we understand now how important that internet has become the new communication tool. The phone, the fax are over. The internet is the new communication. That's how we communicate with our families, our friends. It's how we get prescriptions from our doctors. That's how we have appointments with our doctors. And it's very important for everybody to be able to have the opportunity, have enough bandwidth, and have the affordability to have that for their home, for their children, for everyone. So that's why we're here. Thank you.
Great. And I'm just going to share my screen. Like I said, we've got a, oh, I just need permission to real quick, and then we'll do a short PowerPoint.
I just made you a co-host. That should work.
Yes, that worked. Thank you. Excuse me. All right. Okay. So here we go. Excuse me. So again, just want to thank you all for the opportunity to chat with you tonight. My name again is Carissa Hahn, along with colleagues Darren Hartman, Fernando Roman. We're representing the Communication Workers of America in the advocacy for reliable, affordable, and accessible internet access in Washington. We're particularly focused on the and underserved communities using funds made available through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA. CWA represents workers at AT&T, Lumen, Frontier, Verizon, and other companies that build out and or provide the broadband service to consumers, businesses, governments, and community-based institutions nationwide. So just to let you know what we'll be talking about real quick, or what I'll be going over, we'll start with the current state of the digital divide in the country. We'll look at the funding opportunities that are coming from the federal government and the critical role that state and local governments have in harnessing those funds. We'll share CWA's modeled labor standards that support high road companies getting the dollars. We'll talk about the clear superiority of fiber optic broadband compared to other technologies. And then finally, we'll talk about the critical importance of oversight and accountability, which CWA is pushing for through our model bill to win regulation of broadband under state public utility commissions. So the pandemic really revealed the deep digital divide in the US. I think we all know that, preventing millions of people from fully participating in society, and primarily lower income working class people and people of color. So as you can see in the numbers that we have here, the divide is both a rural and urban issue. The 23% of households that lack home broadband connection either cannot access quality broadband or they cannot afford broadband. So there are two different sort of accessibility issues. As with most forms of inequity in the country, the digital divide is also a racial equity issue. And the reality is that broadband providers prioritize upgrades where it's most profitable, which is in wealthy areas where they can easily get people to sign up for their expensive services and add-ons. This leaves consumers unprotected even in areas that have sufficient access because of the deregulation at the federal and state levels. So industry argues for deregulation, which CWA is against, and they argue for it by saying that competition will achieve universal service. But after decades of promises, we know that so-called free markets aren't working. In many areas, there's very little competition. Only one or two providers offer service to an address. Laura was just speaking about that earlier. And this is partly because networks are expensive to build. Economic experts even call them natural monopolies because of that. And that's why some have argued that they should be treated like utilities, which is, and another reason that the industry gives for regulation is that, or for deregulation is that it will stifle innovation. But broadband is now a mature industry and we've seen massive profits from it. So that argument is getting pretty stale at this point. The federal government has already released billions of dollars for broadband deployment through various programs, and much more is going to come down through the IIJA. or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Estimates of what it would cost to provide fiber to every household that lacks it are around $100 billion. The currently active broadband funding programs include the America Rescue Plan. You'll hear that called ARPA in some spaces. We have the Federal Communications Commission, which gives out competitive grants to deploy broadband through the RDOF, or the Rural Digital Opportunity Program. And there's also deployment grants through the USDA and its Reconnect program. So the IIJA, which is what we're here talking about tonight, has $42.5 billion in funding for broadband deployment, which will be given in block grants to the states to distribute to individual broadband providers who are going to commit to building in unserved and then underserved areas. The IIJA requires states to give preference to companies with a demonstrated record of compliance with labor laws and a commitment to comply with labor laws in the future. The details of all of this were just hammered out in the rulemaking that Fernando referenced. NTIA released on the 13th. That's just the governing body. They write the rules on how these funds go out and what makes a state eligible. And then that is going to continue with states needing to put out a proposal for a 5-year action plan. And the NTIA is housed under the Commerce Department too. So we will talk a little bit more about labor standards in just a second, but I wanted to just look at the affordability initiatives that are a part of the programs. The IIJA provides a discount of up to $30 per month towards internet service for eligible households, as well as up to $75 per month for households on qualifying tribal lands. Also, CWA, our union, has created flyers to share the details of the Affordable Connectivity Program with Washington families. We currently have a flyer in Spanish. We also have a flyer in English. And after the meeting tonight, we'll share that along with any other documents that we reference with Laura so that they can be sent out with folks. Currently, CWA is lobbying state decision makers to give preferences to high road employers when they award the grants for the deployment. We are also seeing many broadband offices and task forces that are being set up without labor representation. Just in those rules that the NTIA put out on the 13th, some of the rules state that labor is required to have a seat at the table, so we already have a win there. And now the goal is just to make sure that we're strengthening up that labor language with any assistance through legislation that we can do in the state. We also have broadband representatives that are sitting on task forces across the country. And then the same thing at the local level. We're advocating for labor standards whenever CWA becomes aware of a city that's putting out an RFP to serve residents. So we want to be involved in that process, know what they're doing, know that there's labor standards there, and if not, why, and we'll be up in your face if not. Cities are increasingly turning to public-private partnerships to build better broadband infrastructures to underserved communities, which we support as long as there's accountability there. So here's an overview of the recommended labor standards for state and local broadband funding, CWA's model language. We recommend creating a point system that gives preference to the high road employers distributing state broadband funds. This approach doesn't interfere with the National Labor Relations Act and federal preemption over the private sector. So under this model, points are awarded to applicants who meet a set of criteria. That criteria would be things such as Washington-based workforce that supports job pipelines for traditionally marginalized communities and veterans, safety training and certification at levels depending on the job title, no recent violations of labor law, professional certifications like through apprenticeship programs or in-house training. So this graphic that I have here is an explainer on broadband, how it works, how it gets to folks. As you can see, or maybe you can't see quite yet, so this piece will also go out to Laura, but I'll explain what it's showing here. On the bottom right with the fiber piece, you can see that fiber provides not only the fastest speeds available, but those speeds can also be maintained when they're most needed during pandemics, storms, emergencies, and more. And like I said, this info sheet will also go out to Laura so we can take a closer look. So in regards to fiber optic and why CWA believes it to be the standard for high quality broadband worldwide. Fiber is what people call future-proof because it can scale to meet increased network demands, and it requires much less maintenance and fewer upgrades, and it's much more reliable. Fiber also delivers what's called symmetrical speeds, so it'll have equal download and upload speeds, which is important because like when we're on the Zoom calls, the video conferencing, it requires those high upload speeds. By comparison, cable service and wireless service do not deliver the same symmetrical speeds. Upload speed is always going to be much slower. And everyone deserves a fiber optic broadband connection to their home. This pandemic has exposed gaps in broadband, and we have an opportunity to close those gaps and do it right. In the past, we've had opportunities like through the Connect America Fund, and without the oversight and regulation that CWA is pushing for and demanding in this round of funds going out to states, we want to make sure that the work is being done for the families, and corporations aren't spending the money on the equipment just to let it sit in the yard, because we've seen that. Other countries understand this fiber piece and how it's the standard for high quality. And they also have national strategies that they have fixed to achieve it. So for example, Japan has a 68.5% penetration of fiber optic links. So South Korea is at 62.8%, Sweden's at 35.5%. I know those are just numbers, but for reference, we're behind. The US is 14th in penetration, and we're at estimated 7.7%. So that's compared to 68 in Japan, 62 in South Korea. So CWA has been active at state commissions for decades, and we've fought back against deregulation of service quality requirements. But the copper telephone networks have been largely deregulated, so you can't rely on even a dial tone at this point. Meanwhile, the newer broadband networks are basically unregulated because industry convinced our elected leaders that competition would achieve universal service and regulation wasn't necessary. So we have model bill to re-regulate communication networks for the 21st century. CWA's model bill is called the Broadband Internet Protocol Services Commission, and it does a few things. First, it has to reverse any law that says broadband cannot be regulated by the state, and it'll give the Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission that authority. It's easy enough if the legislature has the will to do it, because they are well within their rights to pass that. It directs the UTC to write regulations in specific areas like safety and consumer protection that states have experience regulating. And it also gives UTC the ability to inspect facilities and requires that they report those inspections back to the legislature annually. The specific types of regulation we're talking about are things like reporting data on network outages, right? Really basic things that you would think should be transparent and available to the public. Also, states should establish emergency preparedness requirements, which include backup power standards for the network so that communities are not left without voice services during disasters and power outages. I said power outages a few times. So it's very important that states have the ability to collect accurate data and the authority to collect accurate data about broadband availability, infrastructure, and pricing. As always, this accountability starts with transparency. The current action items that CWA is working on in Washington are lobbying legislatures, the governor, and relevant agencies for strong labor standards with a preference for fiber, seeking support and sponsorship for the Broadband Resiliency, Public Safety, and Quality Act, publicizing the Affordable Connectivity Program. Like I said, we had created those flyers, and we're supplying those flyers to as many allies and community partners as possible. We're also collecting signed letters to Governor Inslee in support of quality fiber broadband build out for Washington families. And we've collected those from representatives across Western Washington for the most part, as well as other community partners like the State Labor Council, the Sierra Club, the Washington Alliance of Retired Americans. And if you would like to see more about what CWA specifically is doing, you can find that cwa-union.org/buildbroadbandbetter. So up real quick, here is our contact information if you want to take it down. Like I said, we're going to prepare or deliver these materials to Laura, which means that you'll have a copy of the slide decks. You'll have our contact information there too. And now I want to turn it over to Fernando, who will be leading any post discussion, answering questions folks may have. And then just lastly, thank everyone again for allowing our team the time and space to take up your evening tonight. And we look forward to discovering ways that CWA can partner with Upgrade King County moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was great. I don't see any questions in the chat so far, but maybe as I know that the thing at the county, the request for information is at its early stages. I haven't gotten to see it yet. I don't know what sort of like workforce agreements are in there. Obviously, if they're looking at both public and private options, the CWA would be on the side of looking at what the workforce agreements would be for the private corporations that would be taking over that 24 miles of fiber. At what point in the process do those workforce agreements kick in? Is it during the RFP, RFI stage? Is it after those are signed? Like, should we be advocating for workers now in that process, or in terms of timing? I guess that's kind of what I always liked about Drew Hansen, is that Representative Hansen, is he always says, now's the time, or like not yet, maybe next week, right? Like, so like I know what I want to say, like, yes, workers, but like, what is the time to say it that has the most impact in the process?
So I think that anytime anyone's considering doing any major project, we always have to think about the workers first. And number one, who's going to be doing the workforce? Is the workforce going to be local and creating jobs? And who's going to be maintaining the fiber, depending on if it's a municipal broadband, public-private partnership? I think we need to take the workforce into consideration by employing people within Washington state. And I think we should certainly, advocates as of yourself who are interested in looking into the RFP or applying for an RFP or considering who's going to take on that work, we need to make sure that there always has to be a worker voice involved in that. And we should always ask that question, because although we saw a presentation on municipal broadband, there's a real high failure rate within that. And it's just due to the fact that, yes, it's nice to have municipal broadband, citizen-owned broadband, but it's the high failure rate is due to the fact is they don't have the experience in maintaining that. And I know we're not trying, we want to get away from the monopolies, and we want everyone to have access and quality broadband, but we have to be realistic on the cost it is required to maintain that on that. And then there is a cost for that. The expertise, the tech support, the billing, there's all things to consider. And so I think what we can do is that CWA has no authority to apply for RFPs or to apply for money to install. What we have to do on our level is force our local state representatives to have those conversations with the Comcasts, with the CenturyLinks, the Lumens, with the Verizons, with the AT&T, and make sure that they are applying for the RFPs, applying to get these jobs completed. And making sure that there's oversight and accountability to the unserved and the underserved first. And that's going to be important when, we had a conversation with the Washington Broadband office, and according to their calculation, you guys could be receiving, $750 to $800 million, right? In to address these needs. We need to make sure that there's some labor standards installed with that. We need to make sure that they're employing people from Washington and they're not these high road employers coming in from out of state. I'm sorry, high road, these out of state contractors coming in and not doing the job right the first time. Although we're not against municipal broadband, we just want to make sure that that universal service, that we know that universal service will not be achieved without robust public oversight and of our broadband networks. State legislators and public utility commissions should assert regulatory authority over broadband in order to ensure networks are resilient, well-maintained, and serve all communities equitably. Because what happens with the high failure rate is they end up sending these networks back to the big monopolies. And so that's something that we're trying to avoid. Now, if they're talking about creating a middle mile network to where they're leasing fiber and giving people options to connect the cities, that's different, right? The middle mile would be connecting cities,
We've got a couple of questions. So Share the Cities is the organization that I founded, and we sign on to many labor issues, whether it's for app-based drivers, making sure that they're paid a fair wage and have access to fair labor, like arbitration and a resolution center, or gig workers, or standing with the Starbucks folks out at the headquarters here in Seattle. So there's a lot of, we are very aligned with and sign on to many labor initiatives. We absolutely want to support workers and want to support making sure that these large policies have a worker voice and a worker focus, which absolutely they're lacking. You go at the state level in Washington State, and it's really disappointing on many issues, not just this issue, how much of a worker voice is missing there. At the local level in Seattle, it's much better. We have the Green New Deal. We have a big focus on workforce agreements, whether it's for housing or other issues. At the county, I don't have as much experience lobbying there or know what how they're doing. I think they're doing pretty good, actually. But there's other folks here that know more. There's a couple of questions in the chat. I'm going to start with Andy's and then we go back to Devin's. Andy was wondering what metrics were you thinking, and what did you want to measure in terms of requiring providers to provide metrics? Andy, do you want to say more about your question? And then we'll go to Luke after Devin.
Just I saw something in the model legislation. I think it's really neat. I feel what Fernando's saying. There's value and expertise, and to really roll out service quickly at the scale we're talking about. There's infrastructure that's built, but there's a complete lack of accountability in terms of meeting minimum service standards for people. There's areas that just haven't been built out with service the way they should be. So are you talking about collecting performance metrics? Are you talking about service availability metrics? Just say a little more about that.
So I think we're talking about both. I think we're talking about, when we're talking about our bill, we're talking about empowering the UTC oversight and accountability of broadband, meaning that we believe that internet is an essential service, as critical and gas and water. I mean, we want to make sure that fiber would be the preference to every citizen in Washington. I understand that's a pipe dream because we won't be able to reach fiber to everybody. But we want to make sure that if needed, it's available. If people need, because the costs of rent and homes are on the rise, we have 4 and 5, 6 adults working from home. We should make sure that gigabyte service is available to our residents. That doesn't mean that all residents, need it, but if available, they should have it. I mean, if required, they should be able to call their provider and have that, at a click of a button. So we're talking about the fiber preference, and we're talking about during this pandemic, our customers, a lot of customers, whatever, you can talk to any customer of any broadband provider. They had no place to reach to file their complaints with. We had people, obviously, we had kids fall behind through the lack of investment. They couldn't do remote learning from home. We had our generations that needed to, fill prescriptions, and they didn't know how to do that. They didn't have access to quality broadband, or they couldn't do a Zoom call or whatever type of technology they're using to have that.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything you're saying is, I like that you're centering the people that are suffering and centering the people in the communities that are like really, whether it's rural or urban or suburban communities, that are the ones that are, like you said, a family of 4 or 6 in a household trying to telecommute and do telehealth and all of that, and coming up against those barriers because their broadband isn't strong. My very spoiled equivalent story is that I wasn't able to make it through my sister-in-law's wedding because I was on 25, which was really 3, and now I switched so that I have 75, which is really sometimes even more. And so things are, I didn't even know what those numbers meant before the pandemic. I do want to address one concern that some people have private messaged me about, and then Devin was brave enough to put it in the chat, but I've had a number of folks here. You have to remember that this group is people that are really laser focused on public options and municipal solutions and community owned solutions like cooperatives. There's that map. If you look at the muninetworks.org community map, that's really cool. I've watched that map grow over the 5 years that I've been tracking this issue, and especially over the last 2 years when I've been even more hyper focused on this issue. And that map is, I'd say, a little bit pushing back on the failure rate thing that you're saying, which is what Devin's question is that, what's your citation for the failure rate? I know that over the last couple of years, there's lessons that have been learned from the past that haven't been repeated. I do know, for example, someone else was mentioning in Seattle City Light, and Seattle is a municipal utility. You're from out of state. Thank you for coming tonight from Arizona. But Seattle City Light is a municipal utility in Seattle. We have our light and our power from public power. It breaks even, it's not making a huge profit, but it doesn't need to. I think it's about $5 billion a year to run. And someone else wants to speak to, I'm not as good at numbers as ideas, but basically it breaks even every year, and we have public power, and there's a lot of good that comes with that public power, a lot of kind of intangible benefits. The fact that it's within our city for consumers, there's a lot of consumer protections and consumer rights. For example, during the EBB, emergency broadband benefit, we did see that some corporate providers were either not offering the EBB, which is now, the affordability program, connectivity program, but when it was EBB, they were upselling people out of it and all sorts of shenanigans, right? And like, if the city was offering an EBB, it's very unlikely that they would do some of those same kind of like shady corporate practices. So I think from a consumer rights standpoint, you are kind of in the like center of folks here tonight and that are going to be watching this, that really feel like we've given them enough time to prove themselves, and they've proven themselves to not be what we need for consumers. And so you're not going to find a lot of people that are going to listen to that talking point about here tonight about that the industry talking point around the failure rate for community networks, because we feel like it's past time and it's time for them to have more of that federal funding. I don't know, Devin, if you want to say more about what you posted.
No, I just, I think, so I have a union background. I'm probably going to be unionizing my current workforce. So the goal is not to fight workers, but like the private sector actually has a pretty big failure rate. They failed all of us, right? So just, I think we can probably agree to disagree on that point, but it's something that I had to push back on, because you have an audience of people who are trying to push for publicly owned broadband. And so to keep on saying it fails, it is fighting words. But anyway, we're a union town and we're here to actually support workers. So I think there's areas where we could agree, and that's where there's a lot of value to us hanging out. Because like,
don't get me wrong, I am not fighting against your community
yeah,
municipal broadband. That's not my intention. My intention is that I would listen, and you guys have done your research, and if you say that the failure rate is not very high, then that's good, and I don't want it to fail. Our goal is to provide good jobs within community, to employ and to provide internet service to everybody. You know, our members work for the Lumen, CenturyLinks, the AT&Ts, the Verizons, and they provide a good job. And so we are trying to create jobs with this money. We're trying to hold our employers accountable because we hear the horror stories, as I shared with you. We see it. We've seen the lack of investment that they've done, which is why communities are trying to provide municipal broadband, because the failure of the big corporation, right? That the lack of investment. You know, they're passing communities by with fiber because they're not gonna, you know, make major profits off that.
Yeah, and even in Seattle, in our not so rural areas and in some urban areas, we have that same thing where there's communities that are getting passed by, and we have communities that are being digitally redlined still. And
but we have to look at who represents us on the state legislature, on our city council, on our mayors, and so, you know, we are lobbyists. We pride ourselves as the voice of the people, the voice of the worker, voice of people, the voice of the voiceless, right? So I'm not advocating for any corporation to receive any millions of dollars. What I'm advocating here is that we need to have oversight and accountability of broadband networks, whether it's a municipal broadband, whether it's an ISP, a major ISP, that consumers need a place to report their problems, right? And to get their issues addressed. Because, you know, we want to make sure that people don't lose their jobs if this pandemic has a round 4 and 5 when they get sent home to work. Because Darren and I and Carissa are the ones that have to hear those horror stories about, hey, I lost our jobs. We have to represent our members saying, how do I, you know, why do I have to use my vacation when my service provider can't provide me reliable internet? So we are not against municipal broadband. I mean, there's some, you know, I would suggest that you talk to some city council members in Tacoma and ask how that project went, to where they tried a municipal broadband, I believe, and they're having to lease that back to another provider, right? So because of
they've never tried municipal broadband. They had a third-party process. So it was always with a nonprofit in the corner. But I don't think it's worth debating with you there. I think we have shared worker values that are really valuable. And so, like, you're not going to win the argument that public broadband's not a good.
I'm not trying to win any argument with you. That is not my goal at all. My goal is to provide internet service to everyone in the city, in the state of Washington, and provide fiber optic internet to every citizen in Washington, depending on, and doesn't really matter what provider is doing that, whether it's municipal, ISP, major ISP.
Yeah, and I think we'd love to see it be like, you know, we already have public sector, city light employees, and public sector. I think it's actually, I forget the union that's doing the, you know, running our wires for electricity stuff, but like, it definitely should be union workers. And I think the idea of setting some basic utility standards for internet is quite powerful. And then, you know, you and I can bicker about who controls the thing at the end of the day. But I think we share the values of workers being protected while they're doing work and being paid well. And the nice thing about this is it is a jobs program, right? Like, you're hiring a whole bunch of people full time to then run this brand new utility. So there's quite a lot of areas of overlap that I think we can agree on.
City Light also, as far as I'm aware, pulls fiber, you know, and to some of your concerns, like, you know, the city of Seattle, I think, is in a good position. There is a centralized billing system that has a, you know, large team of people that work with, you know, City Light and public, you know, the public water customers. So Seattle has a lot of experience of providing end services to customers. And as far as I'm aware, City Light has a lot of experience pulling fiber, and there's a lot of fiber in the ground that Seattle's put. And, you know, to the point of Tacoma, that was a much more of a kind of older network, and that kind of more historic fiber is, I think, kind of the problem they have. You know, we say it's a long investment, and, you know, I think it's been, I think it's just, I believe it's either cable or, some form of that. And it's not actually the, true fiber as far as I'm aware. So that's kind of where Tacoma's running into some of the problems that they've had. But yeah, again, like I think Seattle's in a good position given our experience with City Light, the union labor there, and the, just how many end services we provide to customers, that I think it's not a huge leap to say, we give you your power, we give you your water. I think electricity is, probably super challenging. So I think that then when you're putting broadband in, I think that's a pretty easy step for them to take. So
Yeah.
So I want to end it there with that. It's 7:52. We've got about 8 minutes left, and their sun is still out in Seattle. You run real quick, you might get to see a beautiful sunset. And I know a lot of people skipped a lot of really important other meetings that are happening right now at the same time. Everybody in Seattle, I know, scheduled something for tonight. There's literally 4 other things I was supposed to be at. I'm glad I was here. I'm glad we recorded this. Carissa, you're gonna send the letter for us I'm gonna take a vote in our Slack group. We've got about 40 folks in our Slack group, so we'll take a poll and a vote in there about signing on to the letter. And I love nothing more than annoying state legislators and making noise on Twitter. And so when we do sign on, you will notice us making noise. You will get tagged, and you can retweet it if and when we sign on. And I know, Darren, you didn't get to say anything. Do you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I just like to say we're here to make sure that we want for workers, we want workers' rights. We want people, the good workers. We want the work to be done correctly with the oversight and accountability. And I'll talk a little bit about the maps thing if you guys want a little bit. I was talking about the maps that we're talking about, and is we want to make sure that when you give a company $150 million, they got to show where they put it, how many people receive it, and how many people they're going to sell it to. And that's what we're talking about. Not, I put $400 million into the state. Well, where? Who's getting it? Where to go? That's what we're talking about on that.
Thank you, Darren. Any upgrade King County members? We're probably not going to have a meeting again until the fall. And the state legislatures don't go back to work for quite a while. But does anyone have anything they want to add before we go tonight? And anyone? Last thoughts? Okay, I love you all, and hopefully there's a happy hour happening at 4:30 tomorrow in Magnolia. And check the Slack for that information. And Chris, if you live in Seattle and you want to come by and I'll give you the information. You can email me. And I'll see you guys all hopefully tomorrow or soon. Stay safe. Thank you, workers.
So much again.
We love workers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Yeah, great night.
Kindly.